In the Championship, feel the burn of two unassailable leads. Burnley and Leeds are promoted to the Premier League. The battle for relegation continues to grip the nation, and since Saturday we've seen not one, not two, but three managers sacked. In League One, Charlton wreck Wycombe and Wrexham sit pretty, while the playoff battle took another twist. Leyton Orient coming from behind to score 6, net 6 points and move into 6th. In League Two, a ding-dong weekend was all about Doncaster. Promotion chasers hitting every single hurdle, apart from Rovers, as Donny hit the top. Salford and Chesterfield have got a whiff of the playoffs, and there's no more to come from Morecambe, relegated from the EFL after 18 years. All that and more on today's Not the Top 20 podcast. Beast of an Easter weekend feast recap. What a weekend it was in the EFL. George Elek.
Wow, I was going to say that was like one of your least kind of rhymey intros, and then at the end you kind of went turbo on me, and now I feel stressed. But I'm good. How are you? How was your Easter?
So, yeah, all good. Good Easter. I mean, the 2 days in between EFL full slates always feel fairly arbitrary. They're just recovery days for me and for all EFL players, and that was very much the case. I was just gripped to TV and or radio for the whole of Friday afternoon, for the whole of Monday afternoon. It's been brilliant, and we've got so much to chat about. I mean, this pod is sure to be the messiest pod of the season so far as we try and get through everything. We will do our best. If you are a lover of Not the Top 20 podcast, remember that you can see us podcast live in the flesh in Sheffield on the 5th of July at the Crucible as part of the Crossed Wires Festival. And we were, if anything, too overexcited last week to tell you about it, because I told you about it on the Monday pod. Tickets weren't even live yet when I said they were. They are now. You can now follow the link in the show notes and buy a ticket for the live show at the Crucible in Sheffield on July the 5th. It was a championship weekend full of drama. You can just copy and paste that pretty much every Monday. But when there are two slates of fixtures, double the drama. I can't quite believe we've got 3 sackings to talk about in the third final podcast of the regular season. But that is the Championship. If you're watching this on YouTube, please quickly make sure you're subscribed to this channel and drop the video a like for us if you can. We'd love to hear from you in the comments as well. Give us your reaction to the Easter weekend action. Who impressed you the most? What's your hot take for the remainder of the season? Are you feeling particularly offended or supportive of some of the 3 sackings that we're about to talk about? George, let's start with a farewell. 2 farewells to Leeds United and to Burnley, both promoted to the Premier League, secured after Burnley's 2-1 win at Turf Moor against Sheffield United. We'd circled that fixture for months and months and months. In the end, didn't quite live up to the billing. This means that Daniel Farke and Scott Parker both achieved their 3rd promotion to the Premier League from the Championship. Only Steve Bruce has more. Let's start with that game at Turf Moor. Burnley 2, Sheffield United 1. What did you make of it?
I think it fits. I mean, it wasn't a Burnley clean sheet, but it was the kind of performance that we've come to expect from Burnley, where they went ahead, as they normally do, albeit from a relatively scrappy goal. And they restricted a pretty lively Sheffield United side to little. You know, the finish by Tom Cannon for the equaliser was impressive. They went ahead again through a penalty soon afterwards, where I know there was Don Goodman saying it was as obvious a penalty as you're going to get. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. I normally agree with everything that the great Don says, but in this case it looked pretty soft to me, converted by Brownhill. But it was the way they managed the game in the second half, with Sheffield United not being able to create too much and break down a Burnley side who've been able to rely on their defence to defend Leeds so consistently. And just a brilliant atmosphere. I mean, that was, I think, for both, you know, often when a league or a promotion race is wrapped up early, it can end in a bit with a bit of a whimper. But I think because it's been such a tight 3-way tussle between these 3 sides, I think both at Ellen Road, as we'll get onto, but also at Turf Moor, it was scenes of massive jubilation, especially because, you know, a 0-0 and a 1-1, you know, this day was either going to end with Burnley securing promotion, or if Sheffield United could find a winner, you know, going into the last two games relatively nervy in terms of having to get over the line. So an outpouring of relief, I think, for them to do it by beating their nearest rival, or the team who are trying to break into the last two, was so impressive. And I think we just have to give Scott Parker massive credit. We went back and forth over his appointment at the beginning of the season, where initially, I think a lot of people scoffed at his appointment. We then kind of I spoke in the pre-season content about the job he did at Bournemouth, maybe being a bit better than kind of the assumption that they would just go up. But as is often the case, managers get judged more harshly on their time in the Premier League than they do in what comes before it, and that's why Parker, maybe his stock isn't necessarily as high as it should be. But for him to deliver 3 promotions at 3 times of asking with 3 different clubs out of the Championship is pretty incredible stuff. And they look to me, you said farewell to 2 teams, and I think it's a very literal farewell, because I personally would love to see Burnley and Leeds go up to the Premier League and bridge the gap. Yeah, actually farewell, please. Please don't just come down next season having got 21 points. Go and show that it is possible, as Nottingham Forest have shown very quickly, despite a rocky start, that you can bridge that gap between the Championship and the Premier League with decent recruitment and some good appointments here and there. But and Parker, I'm sure, I was on Guardian Football Weekly this morning and I was talking about the kind of scar tissue with Parker, where in particular that game against Liverpool where they were sent for 9, and it has kind of felt like the way that he's operated at Burnley. You can see, I think, how desperate he is to take a side up to the Premier League and not be so poor defensively. But it's just going to be a case of whether or not they can keep hold of the likes of Trafford, Egan Riley, Esteve, Perez, because given the good defensive work they put in, it's going to be hard, I think, to keep the band together.
Yeah, I thought the game was a pretty good microcosm of the 2 clubs and the reasons why one club is going up to the Premier League automatically and the other's missing out in Sheffield United. Because I thought Sheffield United were front-footed. Wilder played 4-4-2, very clearly wanted his team to play very direct into Kiefer Moore. This was a front-footed approach. He made tactical changes to try and force his team to win the game, try and disrupt Burnley. And even though they were up against it, haven't lost at Turf Moor this season, 30-odd games unbeaten, Sheffield United were up against it. They weren't favourites to win this game, but they had to. And it was a front-footed way of trying to win the game. And I thought in the first 25-30 minutes, Sheffield United played pretty well, and had there been maybe a little more connection between the front 2, Moore and Cannon, maybe if Moore had been looking a little bit sharper, who hasn't played a huge amount of football over the last few months, maybe if Brereton Diaz had been involved a little bit more off the right-hand side, or if they'd got some better delivery into the front areas, they could have disrupted Burnley even more than they did, which, they did have a couple of chances. But you look back at the game after 90 minutes, and in particular a second half where Sheffield United were chasing the game and basically punched themselves out. The plan A had stopped working and they didn't really have anything else to go at. And they looked tired and they ran out of ideas. And Burnley essentially had boxed clever. They had got through the initial burst. They'd got through that first half an hour. They hadn't looked amazing, but they had done what was necessary. They had scored 2 goals themselves, of course, in the first half. And then in the second half, they just managed it. They just boxed clever and they won the game without a huge amount of fuss. And that's what I'll remember about this Burnley side. Josh Brownhill, in his post-match, had a good quote about how they had bored their way to the Premier League. And he was understandably taking aim at those, including us, including a large proportion of the Burnley fan base and most Championship neutrals, who hadn't exactly been moved emotionally by this Burnley side, particularly in the first half of the season when they were struggling for goals so much and, frankly, struggling to rack up wins consistently. Bored themselves to the Premier League. Now, I think because of the standards that they've set in the last couple of months, I definitely wouldn't say I've been bored by Burnley from kind of February onwards. They've been absolutely sensational in that time. A serious outfit, not just defensively, but much better going forward as well. Have played much more exciting and effective attacking football. But also, Josh Brownhill, this is a team that has scored 59 goals in 43 games. It's not a particularly good goals tally. 4 teams have scored more than them. It's a team that drew 0-0 in 12 of its first 40 games. Literally 30% of every Burnley game was 0-0 up until a couple of games ago. So I do think the things that were being said and people being a little underwhelmed by what they were doing in the first half of the season was pretty much justified. But you have to look back now in totality and say they managed it well. Parker had the vision of how they were going to approach this season, and it's played out absolutely brilliantly. Brownhill was the 2-goal star again. He's been sensational for them all season, very obviously with the goals that he has scored from midfield, particularly when those in front of him weren't scoring many. But also, he's just an excellent operator, isn't he? Just seems like the sort of professional that you want in your team, and very rarely drops below a 7 out of 10, even if he isn't scoring, and often much more than that. I will never forget, not to be too dramatic, Trafford, Esteve and Egan Riley. The way those guys have played as a goalkeeper and a pair of centre-backs has been unlike anything I've ever seen at this level. Quite sensational, and it was the same last night, quite frankly. Esteve with his defensive work, so often the man making big blocks, big tackles. Egan Riley with his calmness, with his positioning, with his recovery and last-ditch stuff, and also with his passing range. And Trafford, quite simply the best goalkeeper I've ever seen at this level in terms of what he's done this season. I mentioned Cullen, I think, last week. I've really, really rated him all season. He's an excellent operator. And Jayden Anthony, I think, deserves a little bit of love as well. You know, in an attacking sense, he's been their most consistent player outside of Brownhill. And he's a better player than I think I gave him credit for when Burnley signed him. I think he's shown that this season. And while I think the Premier League might be slightly above his station just in terms of lacking a bit of dynamism and transition threat, you know, he's a quality operator in tight spaces, both-footed, he can score, he can create, and he should be, you know, proud of a brilliant season as well. So Burnley promoted. It means, George, they've been promoted 4 times in a row at this level. Twice under Dyche, once under Kompany, and now under Parker. In their last 182 championship games, only 15 defeats, which is absolutely insane. Farewell to the Burnley fans. Farewell to the Leeds fans as well. Particularly delighted for Leeds United fans, George, because when they won promotion under Marcelo Bielsa, that was the COVID season. It all happened behind closed doors. Now, getting promoted 2 hours after your own match was finished is possibly not the dream scenario either, but it looks like they gave it a pretty good go with the party at Ellen Road regardless, and Leeds will be in the Premier League next season. There have been a few bumps in the road, but we always saw this coming, and no surprise from our point of view.
Do you know what? I kind of think I definitely agreed with you before seeing the scenes that it's not the best way to go up, but having seen it, I think it's kind of great. Like, you go there, you watch your team win 6-0, you know you're basically up, but then you get to go outside with all your mates and have a bit of a party around Ellen Road, everyone watching on their phones, getting ready to celebrate, and then you get kind of the all clear to go crazy. And you know what amazing scenes we saw from around the stadium. So yeah, delighted for Leeds fans to be able to enjoy that moment. Delighted that we don't have to deal with any more Leeds. Leeds are falling apart again, although I'm sure they'll probably try and find a way not to win the title in the next couple of games. In this, you know, whether or not either club currently cares about winning the title, I'm not entirely sure. I think Leeds probably will do. I think Leeds will want to show that they're the best team in the league once the dust settles from the, and both teams will, to be fair, from the promotion party. But yeah, to do it in this kind of style, taking on a Stoke side who probably going into the game thought they were safe and then walk in afterwards and they're like, oh my God, what's happened? But they're relentless best. And this is what Leeds are all about. Like, Leeds at home are just a mid-table Premier League side probably in terms of the distance they put between themselves and their opposition. They're so impressive. They're rampant consistently. I think there are so many players you can point out, and at different times we've spoken about Dan James and we've spoken about Joel Peru and Ao Tanaka. I think Jayden Bogle in the run-in has been absolutely sensational, and all season, to be fair. Like, he's such an unbelievably important attacking outlet for them. Where they already have their attacking, aggressive wide players, but Bogle's always getting down to the byline on the right-hand side. His movement in the box when Firpo or Sonneman are down the left has been so impressive, getting him goals at key moments. A really good one-on-one defender as well, and played a big part in their defensive record. But I still think it's just an amazing achievement for Daniel Farke to have lost Somerville, to have lost Ruter, and to have taken this team further. They're a better team than they were this time last year. There's no denying that. And I'm really intrigued to see how they're going to get on next season, given, you know, I've said points this season that Southampton should have turned to Russell Martin, and Russell Martin should have turned to Southampton after the playoff final and said thank you and goodbye. Farke's already shown on 2 separate occasions taking a team up as champions from the Championship and then overseeing a relegation campaign at the Premier League. You know, is he the person to keep Leeds up there? I'm not entirely sure, but he's an absolute master at building these incredibly intense, relentless attacking sides, and I'm not having any of the criticism that's put his way. The failings of Leeds this season haven't been, or the moments where they haven't been quite as, the results haven't been quite as good, has been, goalkeeping errors, which I guess you could say he made the change too late in terms of bringing Darlow in, and some wasteful finishing. But from between both boxes, they've been miles clear in my mind of everybody else, and that is with big respect to Burnley and to Sheffield United, who've served it up to them well. But there's an alternate universe in my mind where Leeds could have set records this season.
Yeah, I think tactically I'll remember this team because of how dynamic they've been, how exciting their build-up is. We've seen quite a few teams over the last few years, and maybe I think about Leicester City in particular last time out, Southampton as well, you could say, who build up in the modern style of a 3-2-5 or a 2-3-5 formation in possession. Lots of slow build-up to move your players and the opposition around before striking in the final third and hoping you get the 1v1 quality. Leeds has been a little bit different, where I basically think their formation in possession is a 2-2-6, and I've not really seen anything quite like it. I was watching the game against Oxford before they went ahead, and it's just like, how are you making this work without conceding like so many big chances on the counter attack? Because the most notable thing for me all season has been the positioning of Bogle and Firpo, like how rare it is to have 2 fullbacks in a back 4 who are that attacking. And again, to come back to it from a defensive point of view, that you don't get caught out very often on the counter-attack. It genuinely doesn't make logical sense to me. And it must mean that both the ability of the defenders, Rodon and Strauch, or now Rodon and Ampadu, and the midfielders, Ampadu and Tanaka, now Tanaka and Gruev, that their ability to both build up without giving the ball away in scenarios that would be dangerous defensively, but also are well positioned to snuff out counterattacks when they do happen, it's genuinely incredible. And I really, really haven't seen anything like that before. Rodon's been absolutely imperious, magnificent, and is a great leader for the team as well. I think if Rodon had been manager, he'd have dropped Ilan Meslier about 6 months before Farke did. As you say,
he'd have released him.
That's Farke's greatest flaw this season, isn't it? That he played a goalkeeper too long. I think most teams in the 72 would like to have a manager whose biggest mistake is putting too much trust in an individual in order to try and manage them into better form. But yeah, Bogle and Firpo as a fullback pairing, unbelievable. Ampadu and Tanaka in midfield. Tanaka's debut season in English football has been brilliant. I can't wait to see how he looks in the Premier League, which we know is just such a jump up. And then Dan James, the big output guy, wouldn't necessarily have been something I predicted pre-season, but he's been fantastic, and particularly in the last couple of months, Manor Solomon, maybe we would have expected this sort of output from someone of his pedigree, and we have started to see it in the last few weeks in particular, where I think was it Tim Sherwood on Gillette said he shouldn't be playing for Leeds. I think what he meant was he's too good for the Championship. The way he said it was
Did you notice that he massively wet the bed? Because the next time they came to me, he was like, "Yeah, hopefully you can get a move to Leeds in the summer and then be playing for them in the Premier League." He was obviously panicking that he was going to get pelters from Leeds fans.
He tried to say he's too good for the Championship. He said it in a way that was a little confusing, and he's cleared his tracks, and I don't hate that. So congrats to Leeds, congrats to Burnley. 2 fantastic teams, and George, that's probably quite key context to link to Sheffield United here, where look. 3 weeks ago on the Monday pod, they were 2 points clear. They've lost 4 in their last 5. It is an astounding stumble, whichever way you look at it, particularly with 3 of the defeats coming against Oxford, Millwall and Plymouth Argyle. They're going to head into the playoffs where they've got a terrible record. Their last 3 times in the playoffs, they've lost in the semi-finals. The 4 times they've made the playoff finals, they've lost all 4 finals. They even got relegated once in a playoff in 1988. So that's going to be hanging over them heading into the playoffs George, and I'm sure we're going to talk about Blades quite a lot more over the next few weeks, a lot more than we will Burnley and Leeds. But just a word on this horrific last few weeks from Sheffield United and how you think they shape up heading into the playoffs.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think they should be and will be favourites for the playoffs. And I'm sure Blades fans will scoff saying, have you seen our form? But you look at the form of the teams in behind, Sunderland, an absolute shadow of the team they were previously. And then we've got this race for 5th and 6th where none of the teams, A, look particularly in good nick trying to get them, and B, the points difference between them and Sheffield United anyway is huge. We know the Blades don't have a particularly good record in the playoffs, which I understand, but again, I'm not entirely sure that's overly relevant when it comes to this time round. And I think there's probably an argument to say that losing or missing out on automatic promotion now, giving them 2 games in which or a couple of weeks at least, to accept it and to get over it, and to rest players who need resting and to give players minutes who need minutes. They go to Stoke on Friday night in a game that's live on Sky, which has, I guess, some meaning now for Stoke because they'll want to get at least a point just to make sure they are safe. Then host Blackburn on final day, which again should be a nice fun game between two sides that don't really need much. So I think they'll be okay. I think Chris Wilder is someone who he'll have his eyes on the prize now. He's probably known for the last week or so that this was going to be the case. And as I say, he famously, at least within Oxfordshire, took Oxford out of the National League through the playoffs, having gone through a really poor run of form heading into the playoffs, and was able to kind of arrest that slide, and was very good at kind of managing for a target, which I think is the case with him. So, obviously frustration. I mean, I think they've done well to keep pace with the other two as long as they have done, to be honest. And it always felt like at some point the music was going to stop. It was just whether or not that was going to be before or after the 46 game mark, and it turned out that it was just a few weeks before.
Yeah, 88 points they've amassed on the pitch from 44 games, 2 points per game record, which is actually a better PPG than they had when they won automatic promotion 2 years ago behind Burnley. It's a slightly better PPG than Leeds got coming third last year to Leicester and Ipswich Town. The fact is that the points return at the top of the Championship is just immense for the second year in a row, and they have they're going to finish third in the 3-horse race. It's incredibly disappointing. The manner of these defeats has been pretty poor. Not so much the Burnley defeat necessarily, but those previous ones that we've discussed. It's a team that I am not 100% clear on what they're going to look like heading into the playoffs, but I definitely take your point that actually having a couple of weeks to process it is probably not a bad thing. So Leeds are top, Burnley are level on points, but with a goal difference that is 14 goals inferior. So if Leeds match Burnley's results from here on out, they will be champions. Sheffield United are now 8 points back on 86, and then it's another 10 to Sunderland, who lost both of their games over Easter weekend. We've spoken about it literally last week. Don't really know what to say at the moment about a Sunderland team who are clearly, the results themselves don't really matter for any tangible reason. They were always going to finish fourth, and they're going to finish fourth, and they will have the home advantage in the second leg. That's what you're after. They don't know who their opponent will be. Could be Bristol City, could be Coventry, could potentially be Boro or Millwall, I suppose, but that seems unlikely. But they're just losing games at the moment. They lost at home to Swansea. They lost at home to Blackburn. They lost away to Bristol City in between those. They've only scored 1 goal in the last 4 games. And it's really, it's clearly very, very concerning. Now, from a neutral's point of view, gives me some excitement for the playoffs themselves, because you have Sheffield United heading into it, pretty down in the dumps. You have Sunderland heading into it, pretty down in the dumps. And then you have 2 spots certainly still up for grabs, George. Bristol City went into the weekend with a 4-point cushion to 7th. They've still got that. Coventry went into it with a 3-point cushion to 7th. They've still got that. They and Boro all won 1 and lost 1 over the weekend. So that cushion has been maintained. What were the standout moments in this chunk of the table for you?
I think just a quick one on Sunderland, something I noticed this morning. If you look at their results since they beat Oxford 2-0 in a game that I watched where they were unbelievably dominant on the 26th of October, since then, so through November to December, January, February, March, and April, they've only won one game by more than a single goal margin, and that was a 2-0 win over Luton. Like, that is mad. Like, for a team who were so good as they were early in the campaign to really struggle to win games comfortably. Every single win apart from that one has come by a solitary goal is slightly alarming. And it was interesting, Régis Lebris, off the back of the Blackburn result, kind of came out and said, yeah, we're going to pick our strongest team for the last 2 games of the season, which in itself is kind of evidence that he hadn't written off these games. Because, yeah, he's experimented and everything else, but if you write them off, then you don't really care about what's going on. You're still shooting for a target, whereas he's actually reacting to the bad performances and the bad results, which, yeah, alarm bells a little bit. With Bristol City, quite clearly not a very good time to be playing Luton. They missed a couple of really good opportunities in the first half. Nahki Wells kind of just hooking one wide of the left-hand post. Tanner with a really good, with a big goal for them. But Luton, were pretty good on the day, and it feels like they've really got the bit between their teeth at this stage now, which is suboptimal for those of us down towards the bottom end of the Championship. And with Coventry, it's another occasion where Argyle have just upset a team coming down to the south coast you probably expect to win, and Coventry, despite dominating possession, were just hit consistently by Argyle's attacking in transition, in particular Bundu. And now Coventry are in a position where they go to Luton on Saturday, where you don't really want to be going at the moment, probably needing a result in order to maintain their top 6 spot. It does just feel like that this whole area of the table is full of teams who just aren't playing very well. Like right now, if you're looking for the form teams in the league, taking out the top 2, they belong in the bottom third, and that is a weird position to be in coming into the end of the Championship season.
Yeah, Boro 3 points off it. They won one and lost one, but the defeat, from 1-0 up at Sheffield Wednesday, a team that have been tanking for the last few weeks, was disappointing, but equally completely unsurprising. This Middlesbrough team is absolutely nowhere near the level of good Borough teams that we've watched and enjoyed over the last few years. I think there's a number of reasons for that, and I think there'll be time for a post-mortem if they don't make the playoffs. But you have to say they still have a massive chance. 3 points behind Coventry. They play Coventry on final day. They have the better goal difference. And of course, both with big games coming up, Borough at home to Norwich, and Coventry, as you mentioned, playing against Luton. So it's not done. And yet most Borough fans, very, very fair and level-headed Borough fans, are like, well, we're not nearly good enough to do anything in the playoffs if we do get there. And if we get there, it's almost in spite of ourselves, rather than through any sort of positive performances over the last few weeks. It's a pretty bizarre scenario. You've got Millwall, who lost one and then won impressively against Norwich on Bank Holiday Monday. They're 3 points off it at the moment. Their goal difference much worse than Coventry's, but they've got Swans at home and then Burnley away on final day. So still in with a shout, and that was an impressive performance against Norwich. Ivanovic looking very, very sharp. The midfield looking excellent as well. Blackburn have strung together 3 wins in a row, won both their Easter weekend fixtures. Only Luton, Portsmouth, Leeds Burnley and Blackburn Rovers did that. So you have to credit Valérien Ismaël for just getting a grip on things when things looked pretty bad just 3 weeks ago. They're 9th and they're 4 points off it. So very unlikely that they'll make the playoffs, but I think you still have to be pretty impressed. And then West Brom. I'm afraid this is pretty doom and gloom. They have lost 5 of their last 6. They lost both games over Bank Holiday weekend away at Coventry, and then most damagingly at home to Derby County. They're not going to be making the playoffs, and they've responded by sacking Tony Mowbray. George, I don't think there's a huge amount of shock at how this has played out. I think it was probably laid out as one of the potential circumstances when he was appointed. And to my eyes, this is quite clearly down to who and what he has replaced, as much as it is Tony Mowbray suddenly being a poor manager at this level. I had hope that he could take Corberan's incredible out-of-possession shape and sprinkle some quality Mowbray attacking play and unlock a few individuals in the final third. Instead, the opposite happened. They lost a lot of the defensive shape, and he hasn't been able to inspire the attacking players to any great extent. It hasn't worked out at all, and yeah, it's just felt a bit like a substitute teacher going into an unruly class and just never quite getting the buy-in necessary. And again, not necessarily a criticism of Mowbray, who I think everyone's pretty fond of, but just a fairly likely outcome given he was replacing Corberan. That's how I see it, anyway.
Yeah, I'm just a bit confused as to what Baggies were doing appointing him, if this was going to be the way that it went if he didn't achieve in the short term. If you're looking for someone to take on a project halfway through the season and deliver short term, I just don't think he's the person you turn to, especially when the previous incumbent of the job was someone whose management style was just the complete polar opposite of the warm embrace of Tony Mowbray, whose playing style was just completely the opposite of the man in Mowbray who liked his players to express themselves and show freedom. Corberan's all about really regimented systems and ensuring that players know their roles incredibly well, and rigid tactical systems. Like it always felt like a really clunky transition in the short term, but with Mowbray what you get long term is someone who's going to develop young players and play a certain way. It just seems like such a bad appointment now. Not necessarily because of Mowbray, but just because if this is what they wanted, if they wanted someone to come in and continue the work that Corberan was doing and get them over the line, I don't understand why they didn't look for someone of a similar profile who'd be able to continue that job. Why did they go and bring someone in who was going to come in and change everything? I feel sorry for Mowbray. I really hope his reputation within the fan base isn't hurt by this, but simply I can understand why the fans will want him out, because they, as far as they're concerned, they were in a position to finish in the top 6 for most of the season, and now they're not going to, and they have to blame someone. I'm sure Mowbray will have no issue getting into a job sooner, but he's not the person that I think they should have been turning to if they weren't going to give him time to implement his methods and basically overhaul the total ideology of the football club.
And shout out Jimmy Mack, West Brom fan, who often emails us his thoughts on West Brom, generally quite late at night after a day's reflection. He wasn't happy about the result on Saturday and let us know about it. And then on Sunday, following up by saying he's happy that the owners haven't messed about and they've acted quick. He's interested in Steve Cooper as the next West Brom manager. So thank you, Jimmy, as always, for your correspondence. The Championship relegation battle, George, was absolutely nuts all weekend, all season, really. We are in a position where...
Just move on.
We are in a position. You've got to just grit your teeth and get through this. We're in a position, George, where there's a team on 50 points from 44 games in Stoke City in 17th who aren't yet safe. There are 8 teams from 17th downwards separated by 7 points. The thing that's most nuts is that relegation battles are normally personified by shambolic performances, poor performances, like a lack of ability, a lack of coherence. And actually, almost all of the teams down at the bottom are winning matches quite regularly to finish the season. So in a weird way, I'm kind of impressed by this cohort of relegation battlers, even though that's such a weird thing to say. And probably start with the big winners of the weekend in that they won both games, George. Luton Town beating Derby 1-0 on Friday through Millenic Alley, and then beating Bristol City by 3-1, responding well when George Tanner scored a worldie to equalise and getting 2 more goals to win. So Luton still in the relegation zone, we should say, but seemingly on the up.
Yeah, if Luton end up getting relegated this season, well, I mean, you can say this about Plymouth Argyle as well, and Derby, to be fair. Like, all these teams just showing the kind of form where, like, to be honest, frankly, Oxford as well. Like, if you offered these teams their current points tally 6 weeks ago, they'd have been over the moon, and they'd have probably thought they were going to be safe. With Argyle, they would have thought they'd be close to safe. And yet, because everybody else is picking up points the way they are. Like, there was a moment, I do this BBC Radio Oxford podcast every Monday called The Dub, and there was probably in early March, I was like 44, 45 max. Be fine, because all these teams just aren't going to suddenly go 2 points per game. And it's happened. And it's crazy. Like, with the Oxford kind of narrative, I'm seeing people questioning Rowett and saying, like, if we go down, he's got to go and all the rest of it. like we could have had exactly the same sequence of results that we've had up to now, and had Derby, Luton, and Cardiff and Argyle all continue how they were playing previously, be 10 points clear of the relegation zone, and everyone would be like, he's doing a great job. What a job he's done.
If I'd offered you 49 points from 44 games before a ball was kicked, you'd have bitten my arm off.
But it's not even before a ball was kicked. It was walking out of the Hull Stadium a month ago, I'd have bitten your arm off, and I thought we'd be 10 points clear of the relegation zone. Like, it's amazing how the analysis of a club's performance is so dependent on how other teams are doing, basically. And it's mayhem down there at the moment. And if Luton do go down, they're still odds on to go down. And this is where I think it's interesting to look at things like odds, or even the Opta analyst who have kind of number crunched and come up with a percentage chance of these teams getting relegated. Like, you look at the league table, you see Stoke, and you see Preston, you see Oxford, and you're like, wow, that points gap is not very much. And if it just takes this and that to happen. Stoke's chance of relegation 0.14, Preston's chance of relegation 1.14%, Oxford's chance of relegation 3.92%, even Hull's percentage chance of relegation 8.08%. Now, these aren't going to be exact, because
sometimes, and I love Opta as a brand. I think what they've done for football is right up there with almost any brand over the last 20, 30 years. But I like models as much as, well, probably more than the next man, actually. And I completely accept that often, and almost always, in fact, they are much smarter than my own internal model. But you can't be having Hull at the old 8% there. Surely there's something's wrong with the inputs. Surely, George.
But then you look, because Hull play Derby on Saturday, and they're heavy favourites to beat Derby. They're 6-4 to beat them. So a perceived chance of whatever it is, 40%. And if they do that, then they're up. So that's that 40% taken care of. And then if they lose that game, or they draw that game, which is a big chunk of probability as well, if they draw that game, they're probably safe as well. So because then the gap to Derby's widened with their goal difference going into final day. So and this is, I tweeted about it yesterday, of like the different permutations of what would have to happen for Oxford to get relegated, even if we lost both of our games. And there's still so many things that have to go against us in order for it to happen. And this is where tables can be so misleading. Like, in my mind, and conversing with a couple of Oxford fans this morning on Twitter, there's this idea that like Luton and Derby will just win both their games now because they're playing so well. And, they might do. But the probability of them doing so is still way lower than the kind of perceived probability that we all have in our minds. Like, you look at Luton hosting Baggies on final day, or going to Baggies on final day, I think it is, or Cardiff hosting Baggies in the next game, and you have this idea that like, well, they're just going to win because West Brom are on the beach. But like, West Brom is still a team. Like, they're still a team of good footballers who aren't just going to roll over like this. Cardiff aren't going to be 5-on to beat to beat West Brom. Like, the perception and reality are two very, very different things. And it still remains, in my mind, and according to the maths, most likely that one of Luton or Derby will get relegated, albeit, 8%, 3%, 1% chances do still happen. And say Preston do get relegated, right? Uh-huh. That doesn't mean that the supercomputer was wrong and it was higher than 1% chance, because it happens.
Well, I really admire the amount of effort that you put into helping yourself keep the tears away right now. No, I mean, look, I'm completely with you. I think
you were the one who said we were on the beach.
Yeah, I'm feeling more confident about Oxford's survival than you are right now. There's no doubt about that. I mean, it was just, I genuinely I'd love to know what it was like for Argyle fans to win against Coventry with such a strong performance as well. Possibly they're one of, if not the best of the season so far, with like Bundu looking so good and so dangerous at the moment. That's made a huge difference to their whole attack, because now it's not just pump it and hope that Hardy can create something out of nothing. He's now bringing more out of Hardy because he's looking so dangerous. Muslic has done a very impressive job, and they win against Coventry, a team gunning for the playoffs and you look at the scores around you, and it feels like everyone else is winning as well. Derby going to West Brom and winning 3-1. Ibu Adams, particularly standout performer on the day for them. Mendes Lang with a really nice goal to make it 3-1. Hull were looking like it was a horror weekend. They'd lost to Swansea on Good Friday, and they were 1-0 down against Preston. The sort of goal that Hull are conceding quite a lot at the moment, where it's just really messy and just not defending their box very well. Then they get 2 penalties. I mean, both of which could be debated until the cows come home, I think. Joe Gelhardt scores both, and suddenly they get a crucial win. Had they lost that game, they'd have been in the relegation zone. Preston, you've mentioned, are currently feeling like a bit of a shambles. They've lost 3 games in a row. The fan base has turned on the players, and they're tumbling like a stone, but will probably be all right, but not definitely be all right. Stoke, as mentioned, they beat Sheffield Wednesday. They're feeling safe. Then they lose 6-0 at Leeds, and it's a 4-point gap when it was 5 heading into the weekend. So that's pretty crazy as well. I definitely take your point that overall, the most likely thing that happens is that it's not some crazy swing and that the team currently in 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th with 2 games to go goes down. But the fact that there's still a chance of that is it's incredible for the neutral. I mean, let's go to Cardiff, because they had objectively a poor weekend. They only got 1 point from their 2 games, and they lost to Sheffield United. They sacked Omariza. They brought in Aaron Ramsey, Chris Gunter and Joe Rules to take charge of the game against Oxford. Aaron Rambo Ramsey, Welsh football legend, Cardiff Academy graduate. Joe Rules, been at Cardiff for the best part of 15 years. And Chris Gunter, who came through the academy at Cardiff as well, Wales football legend. You can see what they're trying with this appointment, George. One last roll of the dice. How did they look in that game against Oxford? Because it was a 1-1 draw, but you had a Cameron Brannigan worldie to thank for that.
Yeah, and that was all there was to thank, because Cardiff dominated every single facet of this football match. They were the better side by miles. In possession, out of possession, chance creation, chance prevention. They dominated it all, and I was really impressed by them. It's hard to know how much of an impact from like a tactical perspective Ramsey, Gunter and Rules could have in the 2 days or so that came between their trip to Sheffield United and the game here, but they were set up pretty well. Callum O'Dowda was very, very good down the left-hand side with Willett kind of tucking in off the left, which was a kind of partnership we hadn't necessarily seen that much in recent weeks. Robertson was good in the 10. Mansverk and Renemota were very, very solid and gave them a decent foundation, and kind of dominated the midfield battle against Brannigan and Volks. And even though they didn't create loads, and I guess it's that chance creation that's been a bit of an issue for them for the most part of this season, they still were always on top, and it always kind of felt like they were probably going to get enough, the 2, 3, 4, 5 clear-cut chances they would need eventually to put one away, and they did through Elek. And Oxford never looked like getting back into the game until Brannigan decided to shoot from 40 yards from a free kick and absolutely nailed it into the top right-hand corner. Because an incredibly undeserved point for Oxford. It's an incredibly important point for Oxford. Had Cardiff won this game, the league table would be looking so different from a Cardiff and an Oxford perspective. And you've got to feel for Ramsey and his team for putting in a great display. But what I would say is if they play like that for the last couple of games of the season, they've got every chance against 2 sides in Baggies and Norwich, who've just both sat their managers and appointed James Morrison and Jack Wilshere to oversee the end of the campaign. Although they'll still be relying on results elsewhere, even if they do win both, to stay up.
Yeah, so the upshot at the bottom is Argyle and Cardiff on 43, 3 points above them, Luton on 46, then the dotted line. Then it's Derby also on 46, but with a 14-goal positive goal difference over Luton. And Hull, who are on 48, so 2 points above Luton and Derby, also with a -9 goal difference, same as Derby's. Then it's Oxford and Preston on 49 and Stoke on 50. Shout out to Portsmouth on 52. They'll be in the Championship again next season. It's been a really impressive debut campaign, or not debut campaign, but return to the Championship for this Pompey side, particularly in the context of the start that they had. I think it was 9 points from 15 games, that the fixture list was horrible, the injury list was pretty tough, they were missing Colby Bishop, and they got through it. They didn't sack John Mousinho, they backed him, they gave him a new contract, and since Colby Bishop returned in November, only Joel Perreault has scored more goals than Colby Bishop in that time. Only 6 teams have got more points than Pompey in that time. 43 points they've got in that chunk. QPR and Blackburn also on 43 with better goal differences. So it's the 9th best record since Bishop returned, but only the top 6, the current top 6, have picked up more points than Portsmouth since Colby Bishop's return from injury, which is an incredible debut campaign at this level for Colby Bishop as well, who has had to go through so much on a footballing level, working his way up from non-league, National League North, Leamington, etc., and then also off the field with that heart operation over the summer. So shout out to Portsmouth. They won both games over the weekend. And in the mid-table region, I thought we were going to gloss over this, but we can't because there's been a sacking today. Swansea have won 5 in a row now, which means they got a quarter of their season points total in 11% of their games. Alan Sheehan doing a hell of a job as interim manager. Watford and Norwich lost both of their games. Watford now looking like another mid-table finish. They're 12th, having finished 11th and 15th since Premier League relegation. They came down with Norwich, who finished 13th in that first season down, then finished 6th last season and are now 14th. And managerless George Ben Napper and co have decided to sack Johannes Hoff-Torp. It's been a torrid couple of weeks for Norwich, and they've decided that their big process guy, their 36-year-old manager who they plucked from Scandinavia, is not the guy that's going to see the process through. He's out. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, quite surprised. Obviously the caveat being that we don't know the ins and the outs. We don't know the relationship between Napper and Johannes Hoff-Torp at all. But it seems strange for a club that seemed intent on building a longer term strategy, invested some faith in a guy. There have been some kind of red flags in the underlying numbers all season around kind of stale possession and an inability to advance the ball into dangerous areas consistently. But there's obviously been some promise as well. Like, we've seen some really good performances from Norwich, and despite those red flags, they've scored a lot of goals this season. And up to a month or so ago, it felt like they had a big chance of finishing in the top 6 in his first season in charge, having lost Gabriel Sara, having lost John Rowe, their 2 best players, alongside Josh Sargent coming into the season. So I'm kind of surprised that after one campaign, they've decided that they've seen enough and are making a change, especially a club that not so long ago had Daniel Farke come and have his first season in English football and oversee an average middling first season that ended in not finishing the top 6, and then followed it up with obviously an incredible few years, winning the championship twice. So my view is that often you are rewarded for maintaining the faith in a manager. Often you're rewarded for allowing a manager to learn a little bit, especially when it's their first season in a new country with a set of players. And whoever comes in next, obviously Russell Martin is a name that's cropping up, and it would make a lot of sense if they're able to attract him, given his ties to the club. It would be an obvious fit. But yeah, I kind of, it feels a bit premature to rule out Thorpe being the right man for the job. And often in these cases, I think it's got to be seen as an admission of failure by Napper himself. Like, if you appoint someone to be a long-term manager of a club, and then 10 months or so later you fire him, then you've made the wrong appointment there, in my mind, and it's an admission of that. So
yes,
it'll be very interesting to see where they turn next.
I definitely agree with that. I think, as I perceived it until about a month ago, I think that the fans were broadly happy to accept that this season was less about league finish and more about progress and just a bit of turnover in the squad, bedding in some new players, some young players. A lot of them signed from overseas, like Cernats and others, Cordoba, for example. And we're kind of happy with that. Clearly, the way the season's finished on the pitch, it chips away at that faith. But I'm still surprised that the club have decided to do this, partly because, I think it slightly undermines their own rhetoric around building something. That's been the whole thing since Ben Napper came in, and the appointment of Torap and the recruitment style and the way that they approach that, the turning over of this squad. It's all, it's very much like this is all in control. We understand there's going to be some tough times, but it's with a bright future in mind, and this is necessary for us to get to that bright future. But I think you do slightly undermine yourself if you then make this decision. It'd be interesting to see how clear they are in communicating the reasons for it, because I always think they're a team, whether it was Stuart Webber, whether it's Ben Napper, they're always pretty good with the media, aren't they? They're always pretty good at saying the right sort of things. Well, Webber wasn't by the end of his reign, but certainly to start with, pretty good at saying the right sort of things to get a bit more buy-in than other clubs might get from fan bases, a bit more patience than other clubs might get from their fan base. And I think there's something to be said for that sort of communication. But, as you've just alluded to, you have to be judged by your actions. The way they explain this away and who they turn to, I guess will be quite impressive. But yeah, it's been bizarre how much of a soft touch they've been, how poor defensively. That's a massive mark against Torup's name, because defensive capability is absolutely a function of coaching and what you do on the training pitch. Of course, patterns of play, and some of them have looked pretty at times, some of them have looked stale at times. Of course, the goal output, which has been pretty impressive for most of the season, their XG numbers have been pretty good for most of the season. That's also down to the manager as well, and that has been a positive for most of the season. But it's a pretty strange squad. As a group of older players like Shane Duffy, Kenny McLean, the goalkeeper Gunn, who've all had success at this level before, but have contributed, I think, to a feeling of a bit of staleness in terms of the experienced group. And then just a lot of youth or kind of early peak age players, many of whom aren't proven at this level at all. And as you said, are probably due a season to bed in at least. Interesting club to follow over the summer, see where they turn. You could say the same about Sheffield Wednesday, who lost one and won one over the long weekend and are currently sitting in 13th with 2 games to go.